The year was 1874, and winter had arrived early in Jasper Hollow, quiet as a ghost, sharp as regret. Snow clung to the eaves like the silence that blanketed the auction yard, where a woman stood barefoot on the timber platform, wind tugging at the edges of her fraying shawl. Her name was Delilah Monroe, and though the town used to say she was the prettiest preacher's daughter for 5 counties, now they only whispered things you couldn't quote in church. Her eyes didn't search the crowd. She stared somewhere beyond them, above them, like a woman remembering who she used to be. Slush pooled around her feet. The hem of her brown calico dress, once fine, now sagged with cold and shame. Her hands were clasped behind her back, not tied, but still not free. The mayor, Hal Pickens, bellowed her worth like she was a sack of flour gone soft in the middle. 30 cents to start. Strong cook, clean, sober, good teeth. What'd you say, gents? No one spoke. Not really. A low chuckle. Then, another. She's 30, one man muttered. Past sweet. No kin, no prospects. Don't eat much, though, another joked. That's worth something. The wind shifted. A child cried somewhere behind a wagon. Delilah didn't flinch. She had cried everything out months ago. She can keep a stove lit, Pickens added, trying harder now, annoyed. Make biscuits. Scrub floors. Was married once. Someone echoed. And that's when he stepped forward. A boot heel thudded once against the frozen ground, and every head turned. Boaz Creed, 6'6" if he was an inch, with a chest built like canyon walls, and a face that never smiled unless the sun forced it. He walked slow, shoulders broad beneath a worn shearling coat, hat low, eyes unreadable. Most folks hadn't seen him in town for 2 years. The wind seemed to hush for him. $1, he said. The mayor blinked. Pardon. Boaz looked at Delilah, not at her face, but at her bare, red feet. $1. Gasps. A few snorts. He's mad, someone whispered. Only thing lonelier than that woman's his damn ranch. Pickens cleared his throat. $1 it is. Sold. The gavel didn't crack like thunder. It tapped like something ending. Delilah didn't move at first. Not until Boaz walked up and took off his coat. He draped it over her shoulders with the gentleness of a man setting a quilt over a sleeping dog. Her fingers clutched the wool out of instinct, not trust. He didn't look her in the eyes, didn't speak again, just turned and walked toward his wagon. She followed. They rode in silence. The road out of town was long, frostbitten, and flanked by trees so bare they looked like bones clawing at the gray sky. Delilah sat upright beside him, his coat swallowing her thin frame. Her shoes, taken by the sheriff as collateral, were gone, but Boaz had left a thick blanket on the floorboard, and her toes slowly thawed under it. He didn't offer conversation, just drove, hands wrapped around leather reins, jaw fixed like he was holding something back or holding something in. The wind tugged at the corner of her shawl, beneath his coat. "Why'd you do it?" she asked, finally, barely more than a whisper. "Needed a cook," he said. She turned her face away. The house came into view just before dusk. It wasn't grand, but it stood proud. A single-story cabin tucked into the hills, wrapped in a fence of cedar planks and stubborn solitude. Smoke rose from the chimney. A horse neighed in the barn. The silence around it was so wide it pressed on the ribs. He helped her down. Didn't touch her skin. Just steadied the coat as she stepped onto the frozen path. Then opened the door for her. Inside was simple. Wood stove, one cot against the wall, a rocking chair, a square table with one chair. A shelf with 2 tin plates, 1 cup, and a Bible. "You'll sleep there." He pointed to the cot. "I sleep in the barn most nights. Heat's better in here anyway." She looked around. "I thought you needed a cook." He paused. "I need peace more." That night, she found a tin of beans, some cornmeal, and made stew with trembling fingers. Her hands remembered what her heart had forgotten, how to nurture. He came in as she set the pot down. Saturday. Ate quietly, then looked up and gestured. "Sit to." She did. Spoon by spoon, they shared silence. His eyes never roamed. Her shoulders slowly dropped. Later, she found another blanket, folded at the foot of the cot. A stitched quilt, rough, but made with care. She pulled it over her knees and wept so softly even the fire didn't hear. 3 mornings passed. She woke early, swept the ash from the hearth, made biscuits that didn't rise but still smelled like home. He fed the horses, chopped wood, fixed a loose shutter on the porch without a word. On the 4th day, a knock came. Old Thad Wilkins from town, delivering salt and flour. Behind him, his wife Tess, thin-lipped, eyes sharp. "Well," Tess drawled, looking Delilah up and down. "I see she's adjusting." Delilah said nothing. Tess sniffed. "Folks are talking. Say a man don't buy a woman just for cooking. Say maybe you were always that kind, Delilah, even back when your husband." Boaz's voice cut like an axe through timber. "You done?" Tess blinked. "I was just." "You're done," he said again, calm as death. Thad grabbed his wife's arm. "Let's go." When they left, Delilah stood frozen near the flour sack. She didn't cry, didn't speak, just folded the towel in her hand again and again. That night, she scrubbed the table until the wood grain bled raw. He returned from a barn, smelled stew, and washed his hands before sitting. She placed the bowl in front of him, then stepped back. "You should have let her finish. I wanted to hear it all." Boaz didn't look up. "You already heard enough. I've heard worse." Her voice cracked. "I lived it." He looked at her then. "You didn't deserve it." She blinked, then turned away before he could see what it did to her. The next morning, she rose before dawn, packed a satchel with a blanket, a biscuit, and the stitched note that read, "Thank you for letting me be warm." She stepped toward the door. Boaz was already there, coat on, arms crossed. "You leavin'? I don't belong here." He looked at her satchel, then at her. "You think you belonged in that town?" She didn't answer. He stepped aside. "Go if you want, but I'd rather you didn't." She paused. "You said you needed peace." "I still do." "What if I ruin it?" He nodded once, solemn. "Peace ain't real if it can't hold pain too." She dropped the satchel. That evening, she set the table for 2. He added a second chair, handmade, uneven, sturdy. When she sat, it didn't rock. Later, outside, the sky turned to pewter. Snow began to fall again. He fetched a pail of water. She stirred the stew. Their eyes met through the steam curling from the pot. Neither smiled. But something shifted. Something thawed. And just as the fire dipped low and shadows climbed the walls, Delilah found a folded scrap of parchment tucked beneath her plate. It was a church registry. A name scratched out. Another name, Delilah Monroe, written beneath in heavy, hesitant ink. And beside it, a single line. "If you'll stay, build a chair beside me." Her hand trembled. She looked to the door. Boaz Creed stood in the doorway, coat off, hat in hand, watching her, not like a man who owned anything, but like a man finally ready to offer everything. The days came slower after that night, the kind of slow that settles behind your ribs and makes a home of silence. Snow hung heavy on the pines outside Boaz Creed's ranch, softening the edges of everything sharp. Inside the cabin, warmth grew not just from a fire, but from something else, unspoken, tender, and unsure. Delilah Monroe had not unpacked her past, nor had he asked her to. But her shawl now hung beside his coat on the same nail, and her presence, once hollow with caution, now felt like a hymn hummed in low light. She stirred stew in the cast-iron pot, while Boaz entered from the barn, boots muddied and shoulders damp from snow. His eyes found her before the hearth. She didn't turn, but she knew he watched her like a man measuring a wound he didn't want healed by accident. "It'll be ready soon," she said, not glancing back. He nodded. "Smells like patience." That made her smile, a small curve hidden in shadow. No such thing in stew, only salt and thyme. They ate without words at night, but the silence was softer now, like the hush before a prayer. When he rose to place his bowl in the basin, she stood as well. Their fingers brushed. Neither flinched. It was a touch without demand. That night, she sat in the rocking chair, mending one of his flannel shirts by firelight. He watched her from the doorway, arms crossed. Her needle moved with practiced grace, her eyes lowered in thought. "You don't have to sew for me," he said finally. "I know," she replied. "That's why I do." The room seemed to hold its breath. Outside, the snow thickened into a hush that blanketed even the coyotes' cries. By the end of the week, the second chair had worn into use. Her shawl no longer trembled when she moved. He no longer made space for her. He simply included her. She began baking bread on Fridays, placing a loaf in the center of a table like a flag between two countries that had stopped their war but hadn't declared peace. Then came the letter, a folded page from the general store, dropped off with a sack of potatoes. Tess Wilkins' hand, sharp as her tongue. Delilah read it twice, face blank. "They're saying I bewitched you," she murmured, handing it to Boaz. "That I tricked a lonely man with soup and soft eyes." He didn't read it. He just crumpled it and fed it to the fire. "I wasn't lonely," he said. Her eyes met his. He added, "I was surviving. There's a difference." Something twisted in her chest then. Not pain, something older. A recognition, like a wound seeing its reflection. He went outside after that, splitting firewood with too much force. She watched him through the window. Each swing of the axe was a sentence he didn't know how to say. That night, she didn't sleep in the cot. She curled beside the fire on the floor, close to the heat, but not close to him. In the hours before dawn, she wrote a note and packed her things again. This time, she didn't cry. When she opened the door to leave, he stood there, coat unbuttoned, hat in his hand. "Town don't want you," he said. "But I do." Her voice broke like ice underfoot. "You said you needed a cook." He nodded. "I did. Then you gave me quiet. Then you gave me warmth. Now I don't know what I need, except maybe for you to stay." She looked down. "I ruin things, Boaz." "I fix things," he said. "Let me try you." The wind blew in between them. She stepped forward, and he moved aside, not to stop her, but to let her choose. She stepped past him, not to leave, but to enter. This time, not the house, but the life inside it. They didn't speak of it again. The snow deepened. Days passed. He built her a stool beside the hearth. She hemmed him a scarf of gray wool. He left apples on her pillow. She warmed his gloves before morning chores. It was courtship in crumbs and nails and breath warmed in shared spaces. One morning, while she was feeding the hens, she heard his voice through the open window, low and strained. He was kneeling beside the bed, not the cot, his bed, hands clasped. "Lord, I don't talk much, but I got a woman in my house who makes me feel like I never knew silence before. If this ain't your plan, tell me fast, 'cause I think I'm starting to hope again." She didn't tell him she heard. That night, she made apple crumble with the last of the sugar. He blinked when he saw it. "For what?" "For nothing," she whispered, "but maybe a little for that prayer." His jaw clenched. Then he nodded once, like a man surrendering to something he didn't want to lose again. One afternoon, a stranger came. A man from her past, Elias Thorne, her late husband's cousin. Slim, smirking, cruel beneath his smile. "Come back with me, Delilah," Elias said on the porch. "You're still his wife's property by law. I got rights." Boaz said nothing, just stepped forward, slow, arms bare, and nodded with strength. Elias laughed. "She yours now, Creed? Or just your cook?" Boaz didn't strike him. He just stared. "Get off my land." "She'll come back," Elias smirked. "She's weak. Always has been." Delilah's voice cut through the cold like flint on steel. "Not anymore." Elias turned. "You say that now. But what happens when he tires of you too?" Boaz spoke then. Soft, steady. "I waited 7 years for someone who didn't flinch when I spoke slow. I'll wait another 7 for her to speak loud." Elias left, cursing the snow. Delilah sank onto the porch rail. Boaz sat beside her. "Why didn't you hit him?" she asked. He looked at her. "'Cause then I'd be the man he said I was. And I got something better to protect than my pride now." She breathed deep. "I used to think no man would ever stand for me again." "I didn't stand for you," he said. "I stood beside you." She closed her eyes. "That's even harder." In the days that followed, they carved a space that no one could name. Not quite lovers. Not just kin. Something sacred and scarred and stitched slowly. On the first thaw of spring's breath, she woke early to find him gone. She followed the smoke trail to the barn. There, in the center, was a rocking cradle. He looked up, saw her, and straightened. "I built it wrong," he muttered. "Rock's too sharp on one side." She stepped close. "You want children?" His eyes met hers. "I want ours." Silence. Then her hand found his. Held it. "I thought I'd never be wanted again," she whispered. He kissed her temple. "You were never unwanted," he said. "Just misplaced." That night, by the fire, he brought out the church registry again. Only this time, the line with her name wasn't tentative. It was permanent, dated. She turned to him. "Boaz." "I ain't a skin," he said gently. "I'm buildin'. If you stay, you won't just cook here. You'll be home here." She touched the page. "Then let's start." And though the night was cold, they didn't feel it. Because sometimes the hardest winters end not in grand declarations, but in quiet decisions to love anyway. And in the morning, beneath the blooming frost of early thaw, they took each other's hand and walked toward the chapel. Not as cook and rancher, not as shame and silence, but as two people who didn't mean to fall, and couldn't fall any other way.